Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Pro Video Pages podcast. I'm your host, Ann Gusiff, and I am joined today by my friend Suzi Schell of SLS Creative Design. Welcome.
Thank you, Anne. I'm really happy to be here.
So I want to share your bio before we get started because I like to. Part of the purpose of this podcast is to introduce people who are going to be speaking and doing the webinars for us. So I'm going to read this that you've provided me. During her 30 years of professional graphic design experience, Suzi's had the opportunity to work with many different types of businesses and nonprofit organizations. At this point in her career, her favorite thing to do is to work with people who are passionate about what they do and help them communicate that passion to their target audience. Suzi is knowledgeable in executing both the creative and technical sides of graphic design, which I can attest to, working backwards from the end product to expertly deliver files set up as required for each production, saving her clients time and money. A strong believer in giving back to the community, Suzi served for 12 years as an executive board member and creative director for a special education-focused nonprofit in Northern California. She also gave back to her professional community through service on the National Board of the Graphic Artists Guild. She's active or still active in her community. She's currently a volunteer for Safe Futures and has recently joined the Lawrence and Memorial Hospital Auxiliary Board of Directors and the Southeastern Connecticut Women's Network Board of Directors. A lover of landscape photography, kayaking, and line dancing, Suzi lives in southeastern Connecticut with her husband and one of her daughters. And Suzi, wait, 30 years?
30 years. Can you believe 2024 is my 30th year in business?
That's fantastic. And I was just thinking to when we met, I think it was 2011.
Something like that.
That's
Yeah, 2010 or
close to half of
2011.
your career.
I know.
That's crazy.
But we're still here, so.
We are, and now we're remote. We met in Northern California in person before Zoom and have a solid working and personal relationship. So I'm glad to be here with you today, Suzi.
Thank you.
I'd love for you to just share a little bit about the services you provide and, who's your ideal client.
Okay, so mainly I work in print design. I do work digitally as well. Do pretty much everything but web design. I've done a little bit of industrial design. I mean, over 30 years, I've been able to cover a lot of ground, which is one of the things I love about what I do is every day is different. I would say my ideal client, I really like working in the nonprofit world. The people there are very passionate about what they're doing, and part of my job is to learn about what they're passionate about so that I can communicate that to their target audience. And it's just a lot of fun to work with people who are happy in what they're doing and excited. So
Yeah. Okay, one thing that I've got in my notes here, which you taught me, and it makes so much sense, and I know other people do it and apply it in different industries, but you start from the end first. Can you explain how that works and why it's so important?
absolutely, it's really important to work backwards and to start from the end result. So especially let's take a print project, for instance. So let's say we're doing a printed agenda for a conference coming up. So look at how many pages, what information do we need to include, and then really importantly, who is producing it? Who is the printer? And then look at the printer and talk with them. And this is my job. My clients don't have to do this, but go to the printer and find out what equipment do they have? What are the requirements for the equipment? What is the most cost-effective way of working with them? Let's say the client wanted an 11 by 17 folded in half, and it happens to have bleeds. Well, maybe, depending on the printer's equipment, if we make it like an eighth of an inch smaller, we can use a full-size 11 by 17 paper and save the client 30% or whatever that comes out to be by just making a little adjustment that no one's ever going to notice. So those are the things that happen when you work backwards, is you can save time and money for your clients and make sure that the files, before you even start to design, that the files are going to be set up properly for the equipment that it's going to be printed on. So basically, the bottom line is no surprises, no extra time and money wasted that you didn't expect to have.
So it means also that up front you're asking the questions of the client and then using your knowledge to provide the solution that's going to get them to the finish line in the most beautiful and cost-effective way, right?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Not kind of. That is
That's it.
what it is. Yes.
Good. So, what sets you apart from other graphic designers?
I mean, I think there's probably two answers to that. One is I've been doing this for 30 years, so I know a lot. I've come up from using a razor blade, which I'll admit I'm not very good at. So it's
What do
great.
you use a razor blade for? Share a little bit about that. Like,
Well, back before everything was done digitally, we were, laying things out by hand.
yeah.
When I started, we were like 1 foot in each camp. We were still doing some things manually, and things were just starting to be digital. So I had to learn a little bit of both, and then I kind of came up through even when the digital processes and software was first new. And there was a lot of background process to it all that isn't necessary now. And the good news about that, though, is that even though the software has progressed and everything's a lot easier, that knowledge that I gained in learning how to do everything old school still applies.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think if you compare to somebody who's just out of college or is a much younger designer, which is great because there's a lot of creativity in this new generation of designers, and it's exciting working with them. But they don't have that existing, I don't have a better word than old school knowledge that we all had to learn. And I just think just time and experience and understanding all of the pieces of what I do, and the fact that I do work backwards, and I've had this, and I know a lot of designers that have the same process, but I've also had these debates with other designers over lunch and over coffee over time of why it's important to even know who's printing, or why it's important to know how you're producing something. I know there are a lot of people out there that produce gorgeous work, but don't necessarily plan for all of the processes that it might be used for.
It's interesting. You bring up a couple points. One is you and I know this architect in Sausalito, and they're often the second or third architect that somebody hires because the first one designs something absolutely beautiful, but it can't be built because it's not structurally designed in such a way that it works with the property that they have designed it for. And I think it's the same thing with you, right? If you don't take the time to make sure that it can be built, then it's a waste of money.
Well, and I think one of the things that really I don't know if it sets me apart, but it's ingrained in how I work, is getting back to that wanting to work with people who are passionate about what they're doing part. I'm really hearing and listening and talking to my clients, sometimes more than they would like me to. But it allows me to really learn about what their goals are. Who is their target audience? What are they trying to accomplish? And all of that needs to be considered in designing, especially for marketing and fundraising.
Thank you. And by the way, I was just kind of doing some mental math in my head. My first marketing job was before any of the digital stuff. And when we would have a product designed, it would be just, it would be the hard copy, and everybody had to sign off on it. And there were color separations and all of that. And that's such, it truly is. Yeah, it truly is old school. And, some industries have changed more dramatically than others. And obviously, design is one of those that has.
My first client ever was Supercuts. And we used to do these little ads for Supercuts and magazine ads, and those little teeny tiny ads that were on the back of your receipts that you got in the grocery store that had coupons for Supercuts. And Supercuts had a library of photos of all of their approved photos that they wanted to use for their advertising. And we would do the layout, print it out, fax it with a note that said, the black blob in the middle is photo number blah, blah, blah. And they would fax it back, and it would stretch. I'd go back and forth, and then we would take the final color separations and we would FedEx them overnight because they were in New Jersey and I was in California, so I've been remote working for a long time. And they would sign off on it and FedEx it back before we could produce it and send it off to the publication. So it's changed a lot.
But also, you didn't want to make a mistake because can you imagine like I think you ended up putting more time, and I think in general we had to make it right because there were so many steps to get something approved that you couldn't just go, hey, take a new look at the edited version. And I think it goes for clients too.
True.
These days I think people think, oh, nothing's ever final, right? Which to a certain degree things
Can
aren't
be
final.
true. It's a little bit true.
Yeah, I think actually like with a website, one of the things that I like to do if I'm working on it, get it to where it's good. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that flies in the face of graphic design when you're printing something.
Yeah, but a website, in my opinion, is meant to grow and change with your
Exactly.
business and with your services and with you. Whereas once you've printed something, it's printed.
Yeah, which this is a good segue into how can you be a good client? Because you've told me stories over the years of great clients and not so great clients. And, we've all had them. And so we landed on the topic of basically how to be a good client to your graphic designer. And it's not just because that's the right thing to do. It's because it makes it so much easier. So tell
It's not
me.
even a matter of easier. If you're a great client to your graphic designer, you're going to get the best bang for your buck. You're not going to waste your money and you're not going to lose time. So you need to work with your graphic designer in a way that gets you where you need to go.
Yeah. So tell me, what's somebody going to get out of this webinar?
One of the things that I want to accomplish with the webinar is to really walk through, whether you're working with me or another graphic designer is irrelevant, really. Your designer, depending on, your individual project is going to be a little bit different, but your designer is going to have a process. And each designer has their own process, but you have to trust the process because that's why you're hiring them. They're hiring your graphic designer because they know what they're doing and they know how to make sure that you get where you're going, hopefully with no surprises. And some of that is on the designer, but some of it is also on the client to make sure that they're doing what the designer needs.
So tell me about some of those surprises as it relates to the client.
Well, things that could go wrong. If you don't, first off, let your designer manage your printing. Let your designer manage your project, even if it's going to your web designer, even if they're partnering with your web designer to work on the artwork, or if it's going to be even a downloadable PDF or whatever it is, trust that process and let your designer manage it. Because they're going to look at the project in the big picture, also looking at parts of it that you wouldn't know. Because let's say, I don't know, you own a hair salon and you're hiring someone to do marketing for your hair salon. You know hair. I'm a designer. I can't cut your hair. But you do what you're really good at and then trust your designer to do what they're really good at.
Okay, so Susie, can you tell me some of the things that you're going to cover in the webinar?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we're going to cover what we just talked about, which is near and dear to my heart, which is working backwards. Also, really looking at who are you talking to? Who's your target audience? Making sure that your designer understands that and how that happens. What are ways to make sure that you don't have extra expenses that you didn't expect to have? One of those things would be like making sure all of your copy is written before you start designing. Or at the end, after it's designed, make sure that you're proofing very carefully. And some tips and tricks I have to make sure that's happening and you're proofing well, because you don't want to start having edits done after you've released the files. That's problematic. It can cause some very big problems and also a lot of extra expense that you don't need to have.
Yeah.
Some of the things that your designer should be looking at when talking with your production house printer, whoever that end piece is. And, some of the reasons that that is a good idea for them to be doing things that you may or may not think about, which but are actually the designer's job to think about. So, and then really looking at making the decisions on how you're producing and working with your designer to figure that out at the beginning so that you are getting what you need.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I really look forward to recording that with you soon and sharing that widely. So, as we wrap up, a question that I like to ask all of my guests is, what is the coolest part about working with a client? Or like, what excites you?
Honestly, for me, 30 years in, it's the people. I have clients who've been with me since the beginning. I have actually my first client, my Supercuts client, is now a printer. I had him just produce something for me, which was kind of an interesting flip. But I still have those relationships from day one. I have clients who've been with me for 20 years, for 15 years. And I love those relationships. I like those calls when my client calls and says, well, you know my business, just do it, And then, of course, I have to bring them back in and figure out what they need. But they're right. I love building those relationships, and I love spending my days being creative. And I love the fact that no 2 days are alike. My projects are always very varied, and it's a lot of fun to come to work.
That's great. I like that answer. Another question, what is your technology must have? Is there like a specific piece of technology or app that you can't live without?
Well, I mean, everything at this point is subscription based, so my apps are always up to date, whether I think about it or not, which is actually pretty nice. It used to be once every few months you had to take a day off and do a big update. And so that just happens in the background now, which is nice. I have a really high-end, beautiful laptop that I can't live without because some of the files I work on are gigantic, and I need to have the technology to handle, like I just did these lamppost banners for a city nearby, and the files were 9 gigabytes. So, I have to be able to handle that.
Yeah.
And good backups, really good backups. Don't ever lose anything.
That is a good point there. And then one final question. What do you consider to be the most important reason that someone should attend your webinar or listen to the webinar recording?
I would say the one most important, if you're not going to do it for any other reason, a lot of people out there are doing their own design. Canva's wonderful. It's very user-friendly. But even if you're planning to do your own, it's really good to have at least a baseline knowledge to know what you don't know. And I hope to convey that I'm definitely a proponent for hiring someone who's a professional. I just hired a bookkeeper because I am not a good bookkeeper, and I'm aware of that. So same reasoning there. But even if you are saying, okay, I'm going to do my own postcards in Canva, but you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what the requirements are necessarily that some of us have trained for, and I'm happy to share some of that knowledge.
I'll just piggyback on that because I've learned from you and just receiving postcards over the years is that, for example, there are certain areas that shouldn't be printed. If you don't know to be thinking about that, you don't know. So, well, I hope that if somebody's watching this podcast and haven't yet watched your webinar, that they will. And Suzi, I really thank you so much for coming on today with me, and honored to have you as part of this series.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.